Good afternoon. We'll start our second panel for today. First of all, allow me to welcome you all and the new joiners over Zoom and physically here in USG, UVLA. My name is Mazen. With the support of the team, I will be the moderator for the coming 4 sessions with our chairman. Let me start by welcoming Mrs. Mary Grepstad, our chairman for this panel, consisting of 4 sessions. Mrs. Mary Grepstad is the first secretary of the Norwegian Embassy in Lebanon. She studied at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Mrs. Grepstad was an advisor at NORAD, Norwegian Agency of Development Cooperation. Mrs. Mary will be the chairman of the Optimizing Good Governance panel of our Lebanon Looking Forward Forum. The floor is yours.
It's a great pleasure for me to be welcoming you all to this second panel of today, titled Optimizing Good Governance, especially since this is also one of the main priorities for Norway's bilateral engagement with Lebanon and has been for a decade, for a long time, particularly in the area of resource management in the oil and gas sector. I will be very brief in this introduction so that we don't take away time from the experts and the discussions that will happen. I will just briefly introduce the 4 main topics under this panel, which can be studied and discussed from very many different angles. First off is the paper titled Exiting the War, authored by Dima de Clerck. We then have urban development with Mona Fawaz. Thirdly, corruption and poor governance with Ibrahim Werde, and finally, power and environment with Roni Karam. So with these very few words, I will pass it back to our moderator, Mazen, to guide us through this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Grepstad. So our first topic under the Optimizing Good Governance panel is War Exiting Through Government-Sponsored Reconciliation in Lebanon by Dr. Dima de Clerck. Dr. de Clerck is a lecturer at the Lebanese American University and St. Joseph University. She is a Ph.D. holder in contemporary history of the Sorbonne University with a thesis focused on the Druze and Christian relations, but to the test of wars and reconciliation of representation and memories. Mrs. Clerck is a fellow researcher at the Near East French Institute and author, co-author, and co-editor of numerous scientific articles such as Le Liban en guerre, 1975-1990. It's a book. Liban, la guerre de 1975-1990 dans le rétroviseur, and 1860, History and Memory of a Conflict. Her discussant for this topic will be Mrs. Tracy Nami. Good afternoon. Mrs. Nami is the founder of Citizens and Politics, a civic education NGO, non-governmental organization, aiming at bringing back politics to the Lebanese people by discussing topics related to history, politics, law, economy, culture, and society. She holds a BA in Electrical and Computer Engineering and an MA in Public Policy and International Affairs from the American University of Beirut. She worked in various fields, including corporate social responsibility, banking, and communication. Before leaving the floor for Dr. de Clerck, I would like to remind you of our ground rules. Our session will be a 40-minute session with 15 minutes allocated for the author, 6 to 7 minutes for the discussant, and then we will follow with questions from my side, the chairman, the public, and the online attendees. Dr. de Clerck, the floor is yours.
Hello. Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for being present to attend to this session. I'm very excited to be among you to this afternoon, and I hope this will be a very interesting panel for all of us today. Thank you. I'm going to talk about war exiting through government reconciliation in Lebanon. So it's really about reconciliation. We're sorry that the topic was not, the title was not precise in the title was not precise in the pamphlet, but it was due to a slight error. During Lebanon's 16-year war, would you rather I present over So during Lebanon's 16-year war, around 100,000 people were killed, and 1/3 of the Lebanese population was displaced internally, around 800,000 people. In many cases, people were compulsorily moved as militia sought to systematically cleanse the areas they controlled from all potential dissidents, whether members of different sects or people sharing opposite political views. This widely spread phenomenon throughout the war was sometimes implemented through massacres. Perpetrated massacres propagated terror and further pushed sectarian groups to unite in homogeneous geographic regions. In 1989, a national reconciliation accord was signed in Ta'if, Saudi Arabia, to provide an end to the war. In confirming the sovereignty of the Lebanese state over the totality of its territory, Ta'if granted all Lebanese the right to reside in any part of the territory under the protection of the law, and the right of the displaced Lebanese to return to the place from which they were displaced. A political decision to disarm and demobilize militias was followed by an amnesty law covering all wartime crimes prior to 28 March 1991. In May 1991, in the total absence of data relative to the internally displaced Lebanese, the Ministry of Justice proposed a forced evacuation plan of premises illegally occupied by displaced people. This plan was considered to be inhumane and was rejected. A first survey was conducted in 1992 on about 67,000 families, with an assessment of all damages on the ground. In June 1992, Minister Hubeika, who was entrusted with the IDP's issue, organized a national congress on internally displaced persons for the, he organized this national congress in 1992 for the 450,000 IDPs that were not able to get back to their hometowns in a war aftermath curbed by the general amnesty law. Nationwide returnee policy had to be developed by the state, since it required important financial resources, specific legislation, and ample security arrangements. In July 1992, the Council of Ministers endorsed all recommendations adopted by the National Convention to be proceeded with immediately. Regular armed forces deployment was completed on July 20, 1992, opening the road for the displaced to regain control over their private properties and homes when available. Starting from October 1992, State Minister Walid Jumblat, the Druze leader and head of the Progressive Socialist Party, was entrusted with the IDP file as part of a political arrangement dividing the state and power benefits among the different sectarian groups and warlords. A ministry for affairs of the displaced and a central fund for the displaced were officially established in January 1993. Both were to ensure the repatriation and resettlement of all displaced people in Lebanon and to pay indemnities to them as applicable. In May 1993, along with the National Policy for Reconstruction and Development, the Council of Ministers adopted a returnee program or strategy consisting of clearing the ruins and developing the land, rehabilitating the infrastructure, housing, local education, social services, and the local economy. 2 vengeance acts performed in 1990 and 1991 in Druze and Christian villages were to convince the Ministry of the Displaced to include reconciliation in the national returnee policy. During the war, bloody confrontation and massacres along sectarian lines had occurred in some villages or between neighboring villages in the mountain, in the Druze Christian mountain. The political authority sought to provide these villages with favorable social climates prior to repatriation and settlement. Reconciliation would provide enough pacification to facilitate home return. They became to be known as the Villages of Reconciliation. For these villages, the MD, the Ministry of Displacement, would contribute to reconstruction and infrastructure only after a reconciliation agreement has been reached. The magnitude, the complexity, and the problem, and the means available to the state did not allow an immediate return of all displaced. It was therefore deemed appropriate to proceed by stages. In September 1993, the Council of Ministries adopted the execution program of the first step towards settlement. A first success was mandatory to instill confidence and pave the way for later resettlement in localities where serious incidents had taken place. For this reason, it was decided that villages which were spared by massacres and needed little protection would comprise the first stage of return. Resettlement would be carried out village by village after unblocking funds. The first stage concerned 40,000 families, approximately 200,000 people, spread over 192 villages, of which 30% were completely destroyed and 50% partially destroyed. If the family illegally occupying the house is not displaced, a sum of $5,000 is attributed to it in order to evacuate the squatted premises. If the family has been itself displaced, the discharge mechanism is blocked until the family is ensured a return to its original home. The maximum allowance for housing rehabilitation was set at almost $12,000 per family, and the maximum amount of compensation considered sufficient to build a house was fixed to about $22,500 per family. In this case, compensation would be paid in 3 installments following construction progress. In July 1994, the Ministry of the Displaced launched with the United Nations Programme for Development, the UNDP, a program for the support of the home return called Aidun. A number of NGOs and the Lebanese army provided assistance to the displaced and returnees and supported the home return operation. This included rebuilding, restoring, and equipping schools, setting up agricultural projects, providing medical assistance and equipment for hospitals and dispensaries, and social assistance to poor families. A series of activities were performed among the youth to further encourage residents and returnees to meet and discover each other. Great importance was attached to rehabilitating places of worship and desecrated cemeteries during the war. Certainly, the availability of housing, the presence of basic utilities, schools, churches, religious markers, and the capacity to earn a decent living were key elements in decisions to relocate voluntarily. In September 1983, the withdrawal of the Israeli army from southern Mount Lebanon, a rural area in the center of the country inhabited by Christians and Druze, triggered the War of the Mountain between the Lebanese Forces Christian militia and the Progressive Socialist Party Druze militia, supported by their Palestinian and Syrian allies at that time. This war represented a recurrence of violence between Druze and Christians after a long history of conflicts in the 19th century. The Mountain War led to the killing and massacre of thousands of civilians, 200 Druze and around 2,000 Christians, out of which many were reported as disappeared. It ended in the forced transfer of the whole Christian population from southern Mount Lebanon between 1983 and 1985. Houses, sanctuaries, monasteries, and symbols of religious identity were destroyed, burned, or plundered, cemeteries profaned, fields devastated, and trees cut. The state sought to pacify and reconstruct the stricken region and facilitate the return of Christian villagers. Post-war government's credibility was at stake, as well as its legitimacy as far as the politically marginalized Christian community was concerned. National returnee policy distinguished between 2 types of situation in the Druze-Christian region of southern Mount Lebanon. Now, first, the exclusively Christian villages, which did not witness hand-to-hand fighting and massacres. Returns to these villages started in late 1992 without recourse to reconciliation. The MD, the ministry, omitted, however, to assess Christian reconsiderations. As a matter of fact, if the costs of resettlement in terms of perceived political risks, meaning security, outweigh the benefits of regaining home and land, then resettlement would be deferred. The second situation, the villages of reconciliation, which are the Druze or Christian mixed villages in which massacres were perpetrated, or the neighboring Druze and Christian villages that endured fierce fighting and or massacres. Security played a vital role in preparing the ground for reconciliation because it implied the presence of a legal authority to reassure the population, to outweigh perceived political risks and deep sorrow. Families of victims would be entitled to an extra compensation of $10,000 and even more, depending on the regions and the localities, for each of their victims. Reconciliation in Lebanon is a localized process of mediation and compensation involving several steps spread over time. It stems from the declared objective of facilitating IDPs' resettlement and averting cyclic vengeful violence, a practice that still structures social relations in certain regions. MD, the Ministry of the Displaced, adopted a form of reconciliation modified from traditional procedures in a way that embodied the political will for pacification, unity of territory, and religious pluralism. To be able to achieve reconciliation, a procedure was followed. For every locality, a Druze committee of residents and a Christian committee of returnees were formed that represented the villagers. First, the ministry organized separate meetings with each committee, residents and displaced. Sufferings, grave problems, and touchy issues were thus more easily conveyed, setting the ground for the encounter with the other committee. 2. The two committees meet in presence of the MD. They are encouraged to speak openly and frankly, and to treat all problems and conflict before engaging an ultimate solution. Discussions around litigious issues are to end with the signing of an agreement of reconciliation that excludes resorting to courts. 3. The two committees work with the MD on implementing the work plan and on overcoming all difficulties pertaining to the return. Then they merge to form one committee in charge of finalizing resettlement. 4. Resuming the reconciliation is achieved, istikmal al-musalaha, is achieved when the villagers entitled to compensation have provided the fund with the necessary certificates to receive payments, and when Christian property violations carried out during the displacement period have been dealt with by the ministry. 5. The reconciliation process symbolically ends in a home return formal ceremony. Christian returnees arrive at the village square where Druze residents welcome them in front of the municipality, a state symbol. This festival contributes to turning the page and boosting confidence, transforming the return into a reality. There is no way the MD could solve all contradictions, conflicts, and problems. National allegiance and the superior interest of the state to preserve peace were arguments used to encourage villagers to reconcile, Christians to agree to return, and Druze to accept the return of Christians. Linking reconciliation to infrastructure and public services enhancements obliged in certain cases the Druze to accept the return of the Christians. As a matter of fact, many Druze were unhappy over the loss of a home or income from the Christian properties they had been exploiting, despite the fact that they were to receive compensation. In a culture where the political or religious leaders are authoritative, The ministry sought intercession from these actors to positively influence the reconciliation process. Given the wide range litigation and arbitration, solutions were customized. Here, the Minister of the Displaced worked as mediator, arbitrator, and confessor, smoothing out the many difficulties and mediating not only between the two committees representing the warring communities, but even between members in the same community and the same committee. The process in reconciliation villages started with Walid Jumblat, who derives his legitimacy, influence, and authority from being the leader to the Druze. While he undertook to resolve all individual and group disputes, he insisted on the financial support to solve the problems caused by displacement and to consolidate resettlement. However, the reconciliation process, in the sense of sustainable return, is not completed if it boils down to the reconstruction of infrastructure and housing. In terms of procedure, almost all problematic localities in the Druze Christian region have undergone the reconciliation process. One is underway, still awaiting the financial support required for a complete home return. A final one is still pending because of disputes that had been brought to the courts before the war ended in blanket amnesty. To achieve reconciliation, plaintiffs would have to waive their rights. A reason why the necessary conditions to reconciliation was abandoning upstream complaints and inability to seek justice downstream is because lawsuits are believed to threaten the climate of concession and perpetuate the conflict. Since the blanket amnesty covered war crimes in Lebanon, it was useless to find the perpetrators and thus to put blame on individuals. Instead, reconciliation focused on the group, the communities, denying distinction between perpetrator and victim. This prevailed communitarian logic abridged individual responsibilities. The indemnity paid by the state to victims' families is not therefore the result of the recognition of a wrong or of the victim by the person responsible. If I am to compare with Morocco and South Africa, I can say that the Equity and Reconciliation Commission in Morocco, created in January 2004 by King Mohammed VI, was designed to evaluate, investigate, mediate, and make recommendations on the serious human rights violations resulting from state violence between 1956 and 1999. Identification of victims and reparations were accomplished. ERC has been criticized because it has not called or brought to justice the perpetrators of human rights violations. It did not replace justice. Clearly, the Moroccan experience in reconciliation aspired to a restorative justice rather than a positive justice. Historical truth rather than judicial truth. In 23 months, however, 8 public hearings were organized. 742 cases of enforced disappearances were elucidated, and documented cases of torture and confinement centers were identified. This did not happen in Lebanon. Missing people in the mountain were not found. Missing people in the mountain were not found. Except for one village, no mass graves are yet disclosed. If reconciliation in Mount Lebanon tends towards a restorative justice, the divulging evidence of crime would stigmatize a group as perpetrators. In a political context and system where the credo remains officially no winner, no loser, and where the ex-militia leaders which ordered sectarian cleansing constitute after the war the core of the administration. As in Lebanon, Morocco's ERC explicitly chose not to identify the perpetrators, while South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission took advantage of naming individuals, institutions, organizations, political parties responsible for serious violations of human rights. Established in December 1995 as part of the promotion of national unity and reconciliation, the TRC introduced a special amnesty to individual perpetrators in order to avoid promoting impunity blanket amnesty. So granting an amnesty in exchange for avowal and information regarding violations of human rights and exchanging truth for justice is a moral compromise to ensure peace. The TRC is a restorative justice. It addressed the concerns of victims and survivors while seeking it addresses the concerns of victims and survivors while seeking to reintegrate perpetrators in the community. The sacrifice of positive law guaranteeing a fair trial is the price for restoring a remediated political space and a new political pact of coexistence. While this was the declared aim of the reconciliation in Lebanon, the policy adopted left no hope to reach such an objective on the ground. Not only were the perpetrators not individuated and identified, but also victims were not necessarily included in the reconciliation. The solution was not a victim-centered arrangement, such as in South Africa, where the injustice was commemorated through the story and testimony of the victims. In Lebanon, although they expressed a strong need to remember and testify, victims were replaced by villagers that were less hurt in their flesh. Their presence, viewed by the Ministry of the Displaced officials was viewed to affect and delay reconciliation. So it was not a condition for them to be present. Government imposed the compromise of exchanging justice and truth for recovery of land and property in all security and with material compensation. So, among the limitations of the Lebanese reconciliation policy, 30 years after its launching, reconciliations have not attracted a massive return of Christians to their villages of origin. Distrust and fear slowed cadence of Christian resettlement, which only attained the rate of 17% in 2005, and an estimated 23% today. Even during the first phase of resettlement, very few IDPs immediately moved to repossess their homes in the so-called spared villages. For many Christians, the reconciliation does not replace justice, and the return involves security risks. Christians doubted the extent to which the Druze disarmed. Ill feelings and wartime grudges on both sides could turn a single incident into a highly volatile situation, and we have seen this in 2019. In the villages of reconciliation, Christians would rebuild, but not install. They hastened to return to the predominantly Christian regions before nightfall. Since 2005, new political reconciliations were performed under pressure of opposition, denouncing the wastes incurred by the MD during 13 years. Power relations at the national level have governed the reconciliation process and hindered reimbursement. Misuse of the resources was employed for political and electoral benefits, while the housing evacuation mechanism has helped restore thousands of homes to the right holders. Many evacuations were in reality fictitious. These are called political evacuations, facilitated by Walid Jumblat, who's had control over the ministry since 1993.
Dr. Dima?
Yes.
Just for...
I'm almost done.
Yeah, it's very interesting, but we would like
yeah.
to get the question as well. Thanks.
Evacuation allowances were paid to families who do not live on the premises or have no status under the displaced. This anomaly heavily affected the amount of compensations. According to an employee in the ministry, Jumblat did not want to seem punishing or disadvantaging the Druze and thus provoke reactions that could attempt to the safety of Christians. Illegal activities from war-generated funds continued to finance the needs of the Druze canton. The end of armed conflict asphyxiated the mountain. Employment opportunities of the dwindled. so did chances of economic recovery exacerbated by immigration and rural exodus of the Druze. A renewed vitality was infused in the region with the injection of reconciliation funds, but only for a short period, with the reconciliations coming to an end, to a term. For the Druze residents, the only way to prevent the region from sliding into a slump, 1/5 of the Lebanese territory inhabited by 5% of the Lebanese population, would be to open it to its neighboring Shiites, whom they reject fiercely, or to its original Christian inhabitants. But Jumblat submits the return of Christians to conditions. While they are called to be the economic engine of the mountain, they should not access any political, social, or economic domination and must adopt a low profile. Displaced persons had been subject to rapid and quasi-irreversible urbanization, which radically changed their behavior. Modernization and adoption of urban trends and practices have distanced them from traditions still dear to the Druze. Families that were spared are more likely to make concessions in terms of self-esteem and resume cordial relations. Those deeply affected feel nostalgia, resentment, and mistrust. Some of them even refuse to collect the compensation for their victims. Others refuse to return to their villages because they refuse to adopt a new behavior to please the Druze, and others because they no longer feel at home in the mountain. Reconciling initiatives performed by the UN, Aidun, and other associations in the villages were seen by residents and returnees to result mostly in failure because of their short lifespan. The social ties they tried to create proved rather artificial and temporary. On the other hand, local initiatives performed by the villagers are continuous and likely to tighten social bonds: festivals, dinners, meetings, entertainment, sports, and cultural events. But are these opportunities really enough to generate confidence and rebuild a trustworthy, long-lasting relation between Druze and Christians? A deep and ancient divide persists between Druze and Christians, feeding from past troubled relations and the memories they carry. Presumably, reconciliation as it was processed, fueled by political circumstances and interests for the moment, was only a key to force sociability and a remedy to symptoms, not the causes. The sectarian, rather the individual rationale, have fueled further sectarianism and fed into national level power struggles. Druze and Christians think in terms of the other group being as a whole responsible for the human rights violation. The whole community pays for the individual, and consequently any individual pays for the whole community or for the group. In reality, in spite of what seems to have been done, Lebanon's state reconciliation policy failed to accomplish reasonable unconditional resettlement, to enhance stricken regions economically, and to promote a durable incident-immune pacification. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dima. It was long, but indeed interesting. We want to thank our artist, Alfred Badr, who represented young Lebanese looking forward in this graffiti, if we can see it. And I will leave the floor now for Mrs. Tracy Name and the attendees online and here physically to ask the question. If we can make it very short, Mrs. Name, 5 minutes, please.
Hi. I'm going to be very brief. It's my pleasure to be here today with one of the pillars of history of the Civil War, Dr. Dima de Clerck. So I'm just going to be brief because we really want to have an open discussion about this and leave place for the questions. Today, with the total absence of a functioning state, the failure of the independence of the judiciary system, and all the unpunished political assassinations and the Beirut port explosion, talking about justice and war reconciliation seems a little bit futile. But still, let us fight for the sake of the fight and imagine together what justice and reconciliation could look like and how it could affect the Lebanon we want to build together. We can think of two levels for this reconciliation process. One is a state-level policies, so we're talking that everything that's top-bottom approach. This could include an official apology from state officials, reconnecting the regions to each other with better roads and public transportation, or updating the history curriculum in schools. The other level is the bottom-up approach. It's everything that we do as a civil society, what we're doing here today, for example, organizing political education sessions and raising awareness on the importance of giving priority to the national sense of belonging over the sectarian one. We still talk about reconciliation from a sectarian prism, and just to quote Dima in her paper, the sectarian rather than individual rationale have fueled further sectarianism and fed into national level power struggles. And I know that this is the reality today, but let's try to talk about the next generation, one that did not live the war and that is less attached to religion and traditions. How can we imagine reconciliation today? In this period of deep social unrest and multiple crises that are shaking our nation, new ideas can emerge and be pushed into the public sphere. Let us use this to our advantage. Exiting the war is a long process that you have to undertake together as a society. And finally, let's not forget that knowledge is the most powerful tool we can have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Nami. I'll start taking questions. If anyone has any question from the attendees or online. Yes, please, there's a question for Dr. Dima.
Hello. Thank you both for your wonderful papers and the very accurate points that you made. But I feel like there is one sector that we, well, not particularly sector, but one aspect that hasn't been truly been discussed is that the post-war trauma and how it affects people's reactions to any reconciliation attempt. So as we've seen multiple times, people do tend to take to arms whenever any opposition arises that reminds them of the Civil War. So what can be some practical steps or things to take in order to achieve this reconciliation while taking into consideration the entire generational PTSD that belongs to our parents and has been inherited by us, their children, as well?
Can you stand, please?
Thank you for your question. Yes, I've a little bit. I mean, I have talked about the post-trauma. Maybe not in a direct way, but you can definitely realize that a lot of when I talked about the seriously stricken people, you know, those that were not included in the reconciliation process, those that were not even included in the committees during the reconciliation, because they were considered so much stricken and so much, hurt and traumatized that they would hinder the reconciliation process. So definitely there was nothing done on a psychological level at all. Even with the NGOs and with the United Nations being involved, nothing has been done on the psychological, or very little. And the things that were done specifically among the youth, okay? And really, it's a bit of shame if I want to talk about the things that were done, because it was specifically done through painting and drawing, etc. Among the youth. And you cannot imagine the violence that was transmitted or translated through these drawings and paintings. It's really unbelievable. I still cannot, because it was about, killing one another. It means, like a child would want to take its revenge, his revenge or her revenge, and was expressing these things through drawing and painting. That's basically, this is what has been done, unfortunately. And the answer to your question lies in the question itself. A lot of work needs to be done on this level. A lot of work. And not only through the youth. Let me tell you, there's something that is being passed on. There is an intergenerational memory. We didn't talk about memory. Memory is essential here because we think that memory doesn't pass anymore. But memory passes because it's linked to the land. So when you still have land in the mountain, automatically, with knowing more about the land and with looking to get back or gain back your land, or even selling it, you will have the memory of it, of what happened, transmitted with the information on the land. So the information is transmitted, still transmitted intergenerationally. So in a way. So definitely it's not like I'm going to bring my children and tell them what happened 34 years ago. No, it is there when the child or when the young will go and look for when they need money maybe and they want to sell this land or they want to go back to this land, or when they ask about their village. So you'll have a lot of information that will be transmitted. On both sides, I'm not talking about only Christians. I'm talking about Druze and Christians. So there's a lot of things that are transmitted. A solution to that is, unfortunately, the whole. The most important thing was a reconciliation through. Economic and financial. It was financial. It was mostly financial, because there's a lot of. Maybe we can talk about that later, and maybe introduce that for the next panel or next panelist to talk about. There was a lot of corruption, So even the fact that you had a Ministry of the Displaced and a fund, a central fund, was bid'ah, a trick, invented by Prime Minister at that time, Rafiq al-Hariri, to be able to block the ministry if the ministry did not do anything, did something that did not please Hariri. So Hariri had the power or the high hand on the fund, whereas the ministry had very limited funds, had budgets. So, and Hariri was the one who would, cater for the funds and give money to the ministry at that time. And Walid Jumblat would go. If Hariri is happy and having lunch and being, relaxed, etc., and Jumblat would ask for money, he would get money. But if Hariri was not was not in his good days, he would never, give money to Jumblat. And the Ministry of Displaced was, if you want, the theater of the dissensions or the problems that erupted between Rafiq al-Hariri and Walid Jumblat. And those that paid the price were the ayants droit, those that had the rights and those that needed to return to their villages. We can talk about what's happening today, but I'm going to leave the floor to...
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Dima. I have a question. Since the topic of our forum is looking forward and see how we can build better in the future, and going through your paper and listening to you right now, it's clear that the Lebanon state reconciliation was a failure or partially failed. What is, in your opinion, the most important reason for this failure, and how we can improve, or is it possible still to improve in the future? when
when you go and ask the people over there, you know, I did a research of almost 4 or 5 years, and I interrogated so many people, more than 150 people. What they want is not necessarily go to court. What they want is the truth. There's a lot of, mass graves that were not, found yet or were not identified. And this is a big problem. There are a lot of people that are still under the disappeared, and nobody knows where they lie. This is something that we can eventually work on. Without going to court, or now anyway, with the reconciliation, you don't have the right to go to court anymore. Once you have signed the reconciliation agreement, you don't go to court. And the last village, Kfar Selwyn, which did not achieve reconciliation, is because there were, because they had already gone to court after what happened, immediately after what happened, and actually they had filed against X, they had filed cases against X, and these were never, what the MD is asking them, has been asking them, is that remove the, take out take away let the plaintiffs remove their lawsuit, their suit, and you can achieve reconciliation. But it's a much more complicated situation, because you have the plaintiffs are both Christians and Druze, because with some of the Christians that were killed, there were also Druze that were killed, because these were close to the Christians that were killed, and they tried to defend them. So it's very complicated, and those that have filed the plaintiffs were both Druze and Christians. Druze because they are accusing other Druze of having massacred their own family members, and Christians that have also accused Druze of, well, it's a complicated issue in Kfar Selwyn, and this is why it's not yet finished. I can talk to you a lot about the Ministry of the Displaced today, and what are their plans and what they're aiming at doing, because things have changed the last 2 years, the last 3 years, and a lot of things have been done. But you need 2 things in order to move forward. First, what we talked about on a psychological basis. Second, we need to identify everything which has been done in terms of, abuses, in terms of, all the the corruption, okay? But this corruption has been identified. It has been diagnosed. It's clear. We have something that has been done with the minister lately, with Minister Atallah, Ghassan Atallah. He was able to have a very detailed report of corruption that was done. And I've looked into it, and it was really amazing, because I realized that after spending 8 years on that, I realized that he had exactly the same diagnosis as I did. So I thought, so this is being well done. The third thing is that we there should be some some avowal. Some people have to move ahead and say sorry for
because
everything
sometimes
which
this
has
is what people are waiting for.
Yes, this is what more than justice. There is truth, where people are buried, what happened, how they were killed, why there has been massacres, why, for what reason, and eventually that somebody steps ahead and says, well, there was an error. We are sorry.
We apologize.
We apologize.
Thank you, Dr. Lima.
And this would be accepted definitely, much more than anything else.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dima. It is clear that the reconciliation took a different aspect. Maybe they thought through money reconciliation can be done. But you added on that. My last question before concluding is for Mrs. Nami. Do you think there are other options or other directions that we can consider other than the psychological aspect, or other approaches that can be considered to ensure that the reconciliation will happen truly?
I'm going to speak from my own experience, which is civic education and doing these talks together as citizens. I think knowledge is very important, and education also. This could definitely, Dima, you can also comment on this, but I think it's very important to talk about the war. When I started doing my talks, I didn't want to talk about the civil war because I thought people would not be interested. And then I had people coming up who were very young, like in their early 20s, who told me, please, can we do a session about the war? And this is when I talked to Dima, and we did one about the civil war. And I think it was one of the first talks to happen publicly like this, about this. And there was a huge attendance, and people really, they want to know and they want to learn. And I think this is also important in reconciliation at some point.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Dima. Thank you, Mrs. Nami. Before, this is the end of our first session. Do you have a question? Okay, one last question. Please go ahead.
Just a clarification for you, Mrs. Dima. I don't know if you're aware of it, but take, for example, the hospital in Deir el-Qamar. It's running bare. Not a single penny is going to Deir el-Qamar hospital. All the monies from the Ministry of Health are being diverted systematically for the past 15 years to Ain and Zain. So how do you expect people to move to Deir el-Qamar and the surroundings when there is not hospital? It's running on funds from private people.
I'm not sure if you want to answer that.
It's clear. It speaks for itself. And by the way, all the corruption was because of electoral, interests. Because all of this is just related to elections. I mean, that's the way it's still going on. I mean, things have to change. I can say something positive about what has been done last year. In the Ministry of that was not, unfortunately, followed up by those that came after him. Atalla did things that he really stopped corruption in many ways. A lot of things were done. But I mean, it was to a dead end, and then he wasn't able to continue. Especially that the one that came after Shreem, supposed to be in the same, the same political, group or direction, where she did not continue what he had started. What he started was not even continued by the same political group. I mean, she didn't do anything. But let me tell you, the money that has been used, there was a lot of money used just to give, like you need, I can give you $5,000, I can give you $10,000. I mean, if you're important, I mean, you can have $100,000 to be able to build the house. I mean, the money that was there is unbelievable. And Ghassan Atalla was able to save, we talk about millions and millions of dollars. I hope that those that will come after him would at least keep the good things he has done.
Thank you, Dr. Dima. Thank you, Mrs. Nami. Before moving to our next topic for today, I'll ask the team to show us the graffiti that has been done by the artist, Alfred Badr. It represents the youth, Lebanese looking forward. It's a time lapse of the graffiti.